Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing the 5-Minute Linguist, bite-sized essays on language and languages, edited by E.M. Rickerson and Barry Hilton. So this is the nice bright cover of this, and this is the second edition of the book. So recently I read a book called Linguistics, A Very Short Introduction, and I was fascinated. This is not my first encounter with linguistics, but it put me back on the idea that this topic is interesting. So after reading that book, I went back to my library and found this book, which I was hoping would give me more information about the topic, and I could read it. I want to talk about what you can expect if you read this book, what I thought about the book, who I thought it was aimed for, as well as discussing these things I've tabbed as just interesting facts that I found in the book and wanted to share with you. So, this is a collection of essays, as the subtitle says, and I think that's probably the most important part to get. This is not one comprehensive book, and it's not even designed to be read from cover to cover. You can do that, that's how I read it, but you can also read the essays independent of each other. And it is designed for a beginner audience, so they do not use technical language or any sort of specialized information that you need to enjoy these essays. The essays are written by a wide variety of authors, so there are 2 editors, but the authors are listed at the end of each essay, and each essay attempts to address a question beginning with kind of what does a linguist do, all the way down to the last essays, which are on artificial languages or made-up languages. So just to give you a sample about what some of the essays are about, and each of these essays is about 3 to 4 pages, so very quick. Again, as the subtitle says, bite-sized, designed to be read quickly without any specialized background. Some of these contents are why learn languages, that's essay 1. Essay 4, what's the difference between dialects and language? 14, do all languages have the same grammar? 18, does our language influence the way we think? 22, what does it mean to be bilingual? 31, what causes foreign accents? So as you can see, each one has a specific question that's being asked as though a question that you might have, and then the specific author for that essay, and you can see who the author is here, will answer that question in the essay. So I think this is good for people who don't have a lot of time or who have specific questions, so they can go right to the essay. And someone who had this book out of the library before was circling essays that I assume they thought were interesting, but you can also do it the way I read it and read it from cover to cover, because even though each essay is separate and has a different style, each essay also kind of flows into the other because the information builds on each other. So you can read it either way. I read cover to cover, but as you can see from the format and the setup, it does not have to be read cover to cover. The target of this book is something that I want to talk about because the target of this book is definitely a beginner audience. I did not formally study linguistics in any form. I have not done anything like that in any sort of academic setting. However, I think there's quite a bit of information in this book that if you have had even a passing familiarity with, say, studying a foreign language, or you yourself are bilingual or multilingual, or if you, like me, have just read other books in the past that have discussed linguistics or topics within linguistics or books on language acquisition, you're going to already have some of the knowledge that has been discussed in this book. So this book really starts at the very basic, fundamental level, assuming you are monolingual, you have not had much interaction with foreign language, besides maybe a failed attempt at learning a language in high school as a class, and you have not touched the topic since. That is the assumption. So at times I found that the beginner pace was a little, not slow, but because the essays are only 3 to 4 pages, but I already knew a lot of the content within this book. However, as you can see, I still ran into a number of interesting concepts within the book. It was just a little bit too beginner for what I was necessarily looking for, but I think if you're looking to start, maybe reading about linguistics, this could be a fantastic place to start. I think this is also a fantastic place to start because let's say you have a question that you want answered, you're reading essay 12, where did writing come from? You read the essay, and at the very end, and this is true for every single essay, there are suggested readings, both within the book, so you can move to other essays that are related, as well as books in general that you might want to check out. So if you do find a topic interesting, but you want to go deeper, you can read one of the books listed at the very end of the essay to get a more academic or a deeper approach on the topic or the question that you just read about. So for that reason, I felt like even though it was a beginner-aimed book, you can start here, and then you can use the suggested reading at the end of each page to jump off and do further reading on your own when you find a topic that is particular of interest to you. Because as you can tell from there being, I think it's 65 essays in this book, yes, there's quite a bit of additional reading you can do. And I like that format because instead of having to wait to the back of the book to a bibliography to then try to find the page or the section that relates to the part that you found interesting in the bibliography to find the book, you can just wait to the end of the essay and find books that are specifically dialed in and recommended by that essay's author to further information or to further your learning on that topic. So I really, really like that setup, and the essay setup seems very much geared towards beginners. So there is some downsides that I wanted to talk about before I talk about these interesting topics. The first is that even though this is edition 12, it is from 2012. So there's quite a bit of dated aspects in this, particularly around language use and machines. I think as AI has become more advanced in recent years, it's gotten quite a bit better. And this book talks about a lot of the shortcomings. I mean, all of us, I'm sure, had very early uses with things like Google Translate, and to be fair, Google Translate still makes mistakes, but I find that it's much better than it used to be, at least for major languages. That's just my personal experience from using it way back in the day to now. So I think there's been a lot of improvement since 2012. Also in this book, there's a lot of frequent reference to different geopolitical situations that are no longer, I don't want to say no longer relevant, but things have moved and things have changed within the world. And I think for that reason, some of that stuff feels a little bit dated. But the core content, I think, is a good starting point, because if you're interested in a topic, you can read the essay, you can look at the books, and you can springboard off it, just knowing when you read something about computers or their ability to use language or AI or a political situation, understanding, of course, that the situation has changed. I would think that would be self-evident, but I do feel like I want to say that in case you think about purchasing this book and you are surprised that some of the stuff is outdated. It is over 10 years old at this point. So now I want to talk about some of the interesting things, because again, most of this was review for me, but I wanted to point out some things that I found interesting in this book. So the first one was something that I hadn't thought of before, or I think maybe a book had made reference to this, but it had slipped my memory. And this is discussing in the essay, why do languages die? So how a language can be wiped out. And when I think about a language being wiped out, I think about things like residential schools here in like Canada, or I'm sure we had them in the US as well. But Canada is the one that comes to mind when I think of residential schools. Also putting forced movement of Native Americans to reservations, or putting them in different schooling systems that force them or penalize them from using their language. I know that was also true for, I believe it was Welsh, where children were penalized for using it in school. I think of maybe a tribe that doesn't have much contact with the outside world getting contact, and the younger generation not using their language. I think of situations like that where outside influences from people cause a language to die. But this book made a very good point on page 120, that says, and if human invasions aren't bad enough, this is referring to how languages die, nature itself can swallow up languages. In 1998, a terrible tsunami struck the north coast of Papua New Guinea, killing nearly all the speakers of Warapu and Sasano languages. Just a few who weren't home at the time are the only ones left to keep the language alive. And that was an aspect that I hadn't thought about yet. Of course, I think I also recognize that when there was the first contact between Europeans and Native Americans, there was a lot of diseases that were very, very horrific and impactful on the Native Americans, which led to whole groups being decimated, which would reduce the number of speakers, and if enough people died, the language itself could die. And that's what sounds like happens here, but it was a tsunami. So humans were not involved in this at all necessarily. A tsunami just came, and all of a sudden we don't have any speakers, or very, very few speakers left of a language. And I think you're more at risk of that when you have a small speaker base, so a small number of people who speak the language. Even if it's like 2,000 or 3,000 people who are actively using it, if they're all in one area, a natural disaster could quite literally eliminate that language. So even if the language feels secure, there's adults who are passing the language on to their children. If you're all in one area, it does kind of have a little bit of risk, which is something I hadn't thought of before, because mostly we think of particularly things in recent years that have caused languages to go extinct, that are human caused. The second one was on page 129. This is from essay 29, How Are the Sounds of Language Made? And this part was something I never heard of before. Sounds like P, T, and K occur in 98% of all the languages in the world. Hawaiian is one of the languages that does not have all three. It lacks T. And then it goes on to say Hawaiian only has 8 consonants, which I did know that. But hearing those 3 sounds, I'm assuming it's P, T, and K, sounds is what they're saying there, occur in 98% of languages. I didn't realize, so many of us, especially if we're bilingual, multilingual, or if you've studied a foreign language, we realize that there are different sounds in different languages. So if you are learning, let's say you are an English speaker and you are learning German or French, you may encounter vowel sounds that you do not make necessarily in English, and you can learn how to make those sounds, but they're not sounds that you have in English. So this says that there's in 98% of the world's languages, it uses those three sounds. Those are kind of, key, but they're sounds that come up quite a bit, and other sounds don't come up quite a bit. I know one that doesn't come up in a lot of languages is the TH sound, and I think there's actually two ways to say the TH sound, but the th sound, like that, this, those, which I can say really, really easily, but a lot of languages don't have that sound, and so when a non-native speaker learns English, they may have trouble making that TH sound, or they may even substitute a sound that's easier for them to make. Like we all know like the word these. Some people say z's or d's, and you can understand them, but it may be because they have difficulty saying a sound that isn't in their language. But I guess if this was to be correct or believed, P, T, and K, if you may have to make those three sounds, you probably have it in a language that you already speak, so you know how to say that. I just was surprised at the percentage and how much overlap is in that section of those three sounds. So that was interesting to me. This one was something that I think anyone who has had to learn a foreign language as an adult knows very, very well. This is on page 153 in section 35, Why Study Languages Abroad. So I actually have studied a language abroad, kind of. I, during the pandemic, taught myself German. I don't know at what point you say, like, you're still teaching yourself German, but I then went to Germany for a language school to kind of see how well I had done. And it says here on page 153, but being confronted with a foreign language is fatiguing at first. It takes constant effort to listen, concentrate, and try to make sense of what you hear. That is very true. Anyone who has had to learn a foreign language as an adult, and then you go to a place that uses that foreign language, and you're attempting to only think, speak, talk, work in that language. So the school I went to had a no English policy, unless you needed something, but I was in a more advanced class where there was no need to use English, so we would all speak German. So I went to school, spoke German all day. You hear it on the subway and the public transportation, and my host family and the other students. So I was hearing and thinking and having to process German every single day, and that's not my first language, and it's a language I learned after, not even as a kid, I learned it after the age of 20. So it's exhausting, and that was something I wasn't necessarily prepared for, was how tiring it is to think and have to process everything in another language constantly. And that was something that I assume if I had stayed there for months, I would get faster and better. And I did find that the later in the day it actually became easier. It was like my brain had become primed. First thing in the morning, I felt like it was very difficult to understand what people were saying, but as the day wore on, it became much easier and much more fluid. I was not fluent. Fluid for me to understand what they were saying. But I also remember one day visiting a friend who I had met from college. We met up in a different town to hang out, and we both only speak English. She doesn't speak German. So we just spoke English all day, and I remember my brain being like, okay, we're back in English. So I think that's something that I read, and it wasn't something new, but and it's something I think most of us can conceive of. Like maybe if you're learning Spanish at home, you think, oh, if I was forced to use Spanish, that would be mentally exhausting. But until you've had to do it, it's a very unique experience. And I do recommend, if you have the opportunity, to do it at least a day, or go to some sort of conversation group in your city if you're learning a foreign language. It's very helpful, and you can start to see how, especially initially, how hard it is and how taxing it is on the brain to understand a foreign language all day, every day. That's just my personal experience. Maybe some of you out there are really good at languages and you're like, I have no clue what you're talking about. This made perfect sense to me, which is very true. The last one on page 231, chapter 52, how many Native American languages are there? This one is one where I became very disappointed in my fellow Americans, because I cannot believe people actually think this. Like, I want to believe this is hyperbole on the author's part, and this is made up. A surprising number of people think there's just one language native to the US, quote, Indian. Nothing could be further from the truth. I had to put my book down after I read that. I don't know who these people are. I don't know if these people live under a rock. That one made me very disappointed in my fellow Americans for believing that, because where have you been? Did you not pay attention in school? Native American languages, there are many, many different ones. There are many, many different groups. And I actually thought this was a really interesting section. So if you are one of those people who you heard me say that sentence and you thought, yeah, I don't know anything about Native American languages, check out section 52 or essay 52, because I think the author does a really good breakdown trying to break down a massively complex topic from thousands of languages across many different groups into something that's understandable and digestible. But that was my moment of disappointment where I had to put my book down, and I actually talked to someone else. I was like, do you think there's people in the United States who believe this? And they were like, yeah, there's people who believe that, which made me very disappointed in my education system and Americans overall. So that was my moment of sadness, and I really hope people rectify that oversight in their knowledge. And if that's something that you think you want to read more about, this is a great book for you and a great starting point. And if you think, well, I kind of know a lot of the topics that are going to be discussed in the beginner book, but I want to know what to read next, then this is the kind of book that's interesting for you because of those sections at the end that have for further reading, so you can go and find what books these authors recommend for additional reading. Finally, I do have other book reviews on linguistics and language, and they're in a nice little playlist, so I put that playlist at the end of this video so you can easily and quickly access those that you want to see if any of those other topics interest you. Some of them are a little bit more advanced than 5-minute linguistics, and one of those is that short introduction to linguistics one that I also read and reviewed. And if you have any books that you would like to recommend, please put them in the comment section down below. I would love to read them and review them. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.